So I'm going to talk a little bit. We're going to move to South America now, where I work in the Peruvian Amazon. Janine, this is where I need you. Okay, so I work in the Peruvian Amazon. At the bottom there should be a, yeah. Okay, so we're going to move to South America here. This blue thing is the Interoceanic Highway. So this is a highway that was built across South America, completed in 2011. I work in this Peruvian region of Madre de Dios, looking at impacts of mining, or looking at impacts of highway development. And also you'll see this area here that's really deforested. So this is all from what's called artisanal and small-scale gold mining, ASGM. And so I look at impacts related to these two development activities. That's it. Okay, so the area I showed you before is an area of the Huaypetwe mine. This is another part of the region called La Pampa. And you can see that there's still a ton of deforestation happening. So this is just December 2016 to 2017. This is in a national park. A collaborator of ours is doing a lot of monitoring using satellite imagery to look at how the area is being deforested. So this is all like riverine, small-scale mining. You might have caught this on CNN. Just this week, there was a big spot. You can take a look at it. Our colleague, though not part of our collaborative group, a colleague of ours who works in the region brought CNN down there to do a story about it. So you can see, obviously, conservation people are going to be up in arms about this, right? This is what it looks like on the ground. So you have these open pits. I'm going to take this opportunity a little bit, should have said, to tell you a little bit about research as I get to the community engagement part. So yeah, so this is what it looks like on the ground. This is a an open pit area where there's mining for gold, and this kind of mining is very rudimentary. It's largely informal and illegal. This kind of mining has grown in this region by 400% in the past decade or so. So in addition to conservation issues or deforestation issues, it's a health issue because you may or may not know that elemental mercury is used in the amalgamation of gold. So you all know elemental mercury like thermometers, right? You may be familiar that it's a potent neurotoxin. And so what happens is this gold is added, someone to a slurry of sediment, someone gets in a large drum, mixes it around, the gold binds to the mercury, then you burn off the mercury, which will vaporize before the gold, and you're left with pure gold. So you can imagine people who are involved in this have a pretty high acute exposure risk to mercury, right? Then you have the large population exposure. So I told you that we're in the Peruvian Amazon. Everyone's riverine, everyone's eating fish. In our studies, it's like 99% of the people, or 100% probably, eating fish weekly, if not daily. And mercury bioaccumulates in fish. You have a high population exposure for folks who are downstream. So this is a zoomed in version of our two studies that are kind of going in tandem, both studying not only mercury exposure, but also migration, health, economic activity, sort of all these changes that are coming along with the development of the highway and of the mining. So we did the first population-based studies looking at how the region is being affected by highway development and also along this Madre de Dios River, which starts up in the Andes and goes, this is Bolivia here, and keeps going into the Amazon. And this is where a lot of the area I showed you that we zoomed into on that first map is right here. You can see this green is or this kind of yellowish is the mining area. So we do environmental studies, we collect fish, we then also interview people, so we have a full systems perspective on what's going on. Okay, so what's in this, well, okay, it's not a research talk, but our big finding is that 40% of the folks in our studies exceed the WHO limit for, or recommended limit for mercury exposure. If we were to use an EPA standard, what we might be accustomed to here, it would be 70% of the population that's exceeding it. So that's quite high, and even based on this WHO standard, it's quite high, right? So this is the kind of take home, which will be helpful for 2 slides from now when I tell you about our impact. So this is really a talk about community engagement. So I'm going to show you, these are all of our partners for the most part. I started this work when I was a postdoc at Duke, so a lot of US collaborators. I'm going to take those out of the picture to show you who we collaborate with in Peru. And our main important partners are the Amazon Conservation Association and the Regional Ministry of Health, as well as CENSAP, which is a NGO that started around the time that we started doing work that focuses on doing research in Madre de Dios. And then the NAMRU 6, which is the US Navy Medical Research Unit that's based in Lima. There's about 5 of them around the world. So without these kind of partners, we would never be able to work in this region and collect data in this region. Throughout the years we've been doing this work, since 2011, there's constantly strikes, strikes on gasoline. The miners go on strike. There's a lot of violence. I've had to cancel trips. We've had to cancel data collection in certain parts of this area where it's just not safe to go at all. And so just as one example, our partnership with the Regional Ministry of Health really enabled us to do all of our data collection along the river. There's no way we could show up in any mining community or really any community and say, hey, we're here to take your blood and measure your anemia status and sit down with you and do this 2-hour survey. But through partnerships that we established there, we were able to go to communities that had a health post and say, we had a larger partnership, and so we would have the health post people tell everyone in their, the 20 families or 75 families in their community that we were coming, and we had this trustworthy vantage point or entrance window. And we would sleep on the floor of these health boats. That's where we slept in these communities. And as you go downriver traveling by boat, and it was the only way that we could ensure this kind of safe atmosphere for us, and we took students along with us and stuff like that. So that's just one example. I have a whole bunch of other examples of why the partnerships were helpful for us, but that's that. So we've had a lot of impacts from this work. That 40% statistic I told you about, due to a partnership, one of our partners at CENSAP, that NGO, this woman, Dr. Ana Maria Morales, she ended up getting appointed to a decently high position in the National Ministry of Health. And through a lot of political things that I won't go into, she ended up with the ear of the Minister of Health and was able to kind of convince him that this mercury issue was such a big deal in Madre de Dios, based on our work and based on some other folks' work. And that vice minister went to the president, and in May 2016, the president declared a state of emergency based partially on our work in the region. And we happened to be in town for a whole different grant funded by NASA when this happened. And what ensued is that we ended up briefing the Minister of Health, all of the ministers of all of the Minister of Culture, Minister of Women and Social Things, all of the ministers. Sorry, social and behavioral folks. But so, we got all this coverage, and we were able to influence the policy that was happening. We were able to influence the interventions that were about to go into place. We then put together documents advising on how they could be better using biomarkers to look for exposure. So, this has been covered on NPR, in Nature. This was us with all the ministers of health. In addition to that, we do a lot of stuff on the ground. This is the educational stuff we do when we return results. So we have these little community meetings when the health posts bring everybody together, and we do a talk about mercury. We do a talk about mitigating exposure to that. We've done a lot of toothbrushing exercises with kids, and it's really enhanced our work and brought the ability to measure this kind of stuff to a region where that wasn't possible. Okay, so if I was to have one big lesson learned from this, it is really that there's a lot of mutual benefits to doing this. Our work would be totally impossible to do without our engaged counterparts at these NGOs and with the ministries. And it requires a lot of face time. There's a lot of formal engagement, a lot of signed documents, a lot of things like this, but there's also a lot of dinners and getting to know people and dancing and drinking that make that instill trust. So anyway, that's my whole talk. Thank you.